and welcome to ISCM's virtual forum themed Reimagining Procurement. I would like to thank all my panelists and speakers for accepting the request and being there for the discussion. I would also like to thank all the attendees there. So all the attendees, please make sure there are certain ground rules. On the right-hand side, there is a control panel. You can type in and send your questions, and we would answer that post-panel discussion. Thank you for being there. As an institution, we are into education, training, research, and consulting. We offer certification programs, courses, executive programs, leadership programs in the domain of supply chain planning, logistics, and we have a focus center of excellence in the domain of demand planning, SNOP, and IBP, which we call it as a Demand Planning Academy. Do visit www.demandplanningacademy.com. We have a supply chain community and a knowledge portal where you can view latest blogs, articles, case studies. You can visit www.scmpronowledge.in, and in case you wish to become a community member, do write to us. The other wing is our events wing, where we do events in the domain of procurement, logistics, warehousing, and demand planning. So do visit all our website, follow us on YouTube, social media to know more about us. That's our ecosystem of ISCM, www.iscmindia.in. Let me go ahead and introduce you to the thought leaders for the day. We have Radha Mohan, Regional Procurement Director from Reckitt Benckiser. We have Jayakrishnan Nair, Procurement Director at McCormick and Company. Gaurav Arora, Senior Director Global Sourcing and Procurement from Biocon. Tarun, Gakhar, Head of Procurement Operations at Kellogg's. Vikas, Kalal, Head Procurement and SCM at Thyssenkrupp Elevator. Aadya, Head Procurement Excellence at Cairn Oil and Gas. Sachin, Mathur, Head Supply Chain and Procurement at Dorf, Ketal. Ashish, Bansal, Head India Procurement at Colgate-Palmolive, India. Girish, Director of Institute of Supply Chain Management. And Dr. Rakesh Singh, Chairman of Institute of Supply Chain Management. I would request all the panelists to join on the stage and request Dr. Singh to please come up and lead the discussion. Thank you.
Good afternoon and welcome to Reimagining Procurement Virtual Forum today. The forum will be moderated or led by me and also co-moderated by my colleague Girish VS. Can I be heard?
Yes, okay.
Yeah, okay. All right. As we know, when we look at reimagining procurement, it is in the backdrop of a major pandemic. I think someone has both the laptop and the computer open at the same time, so that's why it's conflicting and distorting the sound system. If anyone has done that, one of the devices have to be put off. All right. So in the backdrop of this pandemic, which is very different than most natural disasters or smaller pandemics that have taken place earlier, primarily because we have seen that there is a lot of disruption of supplies all over the place after natural disasters like the earthquake, tsunami, floods, or any natural disaster in US. This particular pandemic is a little different as I see it because it started with supply disruption, primarily in one country which almost supplies everything to the rest of the world, if you see it in the proportion. And then the pandemic moved in its length, and length meaning across the geography and in time, and affected almost major economies in the world. As we go today, 199 economies in the world or countries in the world were affected and are affected, and some of them are also getting affected. Meaning that It started as a supply shock, became a demand shock. And I think anything where both these elements are under shock and there's a shift in demand because of this shock, and if there's a lockdown, which essentially means that you stop the demand in an unnatural way just to get out of a pandemic, to save lives, you affect livelihoods and demand gets affected. And in that sense, the businesses gets affected in a big way. Supply chain, where procurement is a very essential part, uh, plays a very strong role in the lifeline of organization as we have seen it today. And we really see that supply chains have become very important element of any strategy post-pandemic, because they are defining the end-to-end movement of goods and also cash flows. And this has made it very important for us to look at what has been the immediate fallout of this pandemic. Immediate meaning very immediate. As soon as we saw the pandemic coming, what McKinsey defines it as resolve. How did we resolve the near-term planning, both on demand and supply side, to meet the challenges of pandemic? Resilience. How did we start building resilience into our procurement planning? Return, as we are seeing some return to the earlier periods. How are we going to plan the return, and how are we going to reimagine the future of procurement and future of supply chain together? So in this context, Institute of Supply Chain Management thought that we need to have a little bit of discussion on this on the macro fronts, and not so much in a micro aspect of procurement, but more strategic, or tactical or operational, but having an impact on organization lifeline. Not going much into details of this, I would start with looking at the pandemic in a very holistic manner. And as I said, we do have some panels, but we may not adhere to that rules. We'll make it as a roundtable town hall, as I told you yesterday, in terms of how the flow could be. All of us can participate. So if you see the supply side disruptions, or if you see the demand side disruptions, in fact, India fell in between. We had something of this too at the same time. As the pandemic intensified and we were early to adopt lockdowns, India was in a very different stage of response and impact. So having seen that, what has been the initial reaction of organization? I'm not talking about any strategy here, reaction of organization. And how did firms actually adopt to certain practices which would be resilient in its nature, at least in the near term? Near term is a very, very short term that we define in supply chains. So I'll move on to Mr. Radha Mohan Gupta first and ask him this particular question, and he can actually tell us his response to the overall supply chain disruptions during the pandemic immediate phase, and what are the learnings from that? You have to unmute yourself, Radha.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think we have passed through this pandemic by now for 4 months, and the learnings have been immense into throughout the supply chains. To answer the specific question which the doctor has asked, is that what are the main thing, and I will look at it from the procurement point of view. Now, if we look at that, what are the major things which have been impacted? I think if you look at, there are 3 things. Number one is the supplies. If there are plethora of the things we can talk about supply chain disruption which happened, but I'm focusing today mainly on the procurement. Now, if you see the supplies from the suppliers, that got impacted. There could be various reasons for that, right? It could be you were having a single source. It could be that it was coming from one country without naming it, or it could be, of course, China, but it could be even otherwise as well. It was coming from one country. Second thing, it could be also that And I have been saying it, that for producing your A class of item, you might be needing many items, and one could be E class of item. You have never visited that supplier. You have never invested into that supplier who is supplying you those kind of small items. And that small item has got impacted your A class item. Now, so number one is your supply got impacted in various ways. It could be. That's number one. Number two, what happened from procurement point of view is the price escalation. This is the first time we saw that it is not only supply, but it was a supply shock as well as a demand shock as well. And now you will ask me that if the demand has gone down, why the prices went up? However, I think most of the people will agree over here is that while the demand also got impacted, supply also equally got impacted. There was a dearth of the supply coming in. There are common supplier you source from, and the demand is going to them. And how do they prioritize you? The second thing was on the price escalation and how procurement managed it. We'll cover it later. That was the second thing. And third thing, I would say we all have seen about that the physical movement of the people, of the goods, of information, etc., which was there across the supply chain, that got impacted drastically. The labor, you talk about the migrant labors in the plant, you have plant open, but you don't have labor to work over there, or you have the social distancing norms for which our plants are not designed as of now, and you have to follow over there kind of thing. A line cannot run without 10 people if they are manned by 10 people. You do the social distancing, and if you put 4 people, how you will run the line, right? So these were the issues, some of the issues, and mainly in terms of you were talking about the physical movement of the goods and people and information, and that's where the technology comes into the picture. That yes, we did have the issue on technology or digitization, if I can say, wherever we could do. So in nutshell, to consolidate my answer, that we passed through certainly on the supply issue, on the price escalation from procurement point of view, and of course from the technology point of view during this pandemic in the last 3-4 months.
Thank you, Radha. I think that's a good summary in terms of issues. Let me go to Vikas Kalal. And because as you have been, saying in the dry runs that you would like to bring about the impact on the demand side and their impact on the overall procurement, can you elaborate a little on that?
Yeah. Good afternoon. So,
Good afternoon.
thank you, Dr. Mr. Gupta, to putting the context to this forum on the impact what we had. So, I would like to just brief on how the pandemic has caused us the issues. As we said that there was an over-reliance on one particular geographical region, and we say because that China was considered to be a low-cost manufacturer, and it is a global supplier of all parts and raw materials, and also it is an hub of the logistics and manufacturing center of the world. And if you talk about the exports part, then it supplies almost around $2.5 trillion to the world market. So because this pandemic started with China and initially the lockdown happened in China, that is why it impacted the global market on a large. And if we talk about the world, then it is estimated that almost around 60,000 companies globally, other than China, have been impacted by this pandemic. Now, if we talk about the repercussions of this, how it has impacted. So first was the demand side impact, which came in, and in demand side, if you see, then air travel, hotel demand was quite disappeared. Means that demand has quite disappeared till now, and it has not come into the case. So that was on the disappearing part. There was also a demand which got surged during this period. So your remote productivity tools, online retail demand that has increased. So and if you see the corporate real estate demand, so it has also caused the demand shift. As such, earlier the corporate real estate demand was good, but now with home and your office, home becoming the office station and where you're working, So I think that demand shift will happen, and that will also impact on the demand side. Now, for us as a procurement and supply chain professionals, the current times are the hard times where entire organization is riding upon us to find out the ways where we can save the cost and we can ride through this particular wave. Uh, so for us, it has become quite a responsibility to check on each and every aspect where we can make the change. So major implications what has come on the procurement and supply chain side, if we talk about, then your sourcing priorities will change. So earlier we used to talk about the cost reduction initiatives, and largely India being a country where the cost reduction initiatives more talked about. But now we need to consider the ensuring of the supply chain continuity. So that is the priority where the shift will happen.
All
We
right,
also need to,
thank you, Vikas. We'll come back to you a little later.
yeah.
Tarun, you have also seen a huge disruption during the pandemic. What has been the major changes in the larger ecosystem of consumer behavior, as Vikas was saying, which has affected your supply chain and procurement policies, and what were your business continuity plan during this period of time?
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me here, Dr. Singh. So I agree, this disruption was completely unseen, and I guess no organization has been left unaffected, because of the catastrophe disruptions that this event has casted on general trade and on the organizations. Uh, as far as the impact on industries like us is concerned, I think we saw it coming a little early, I would say. So when it actually started in China, that was a time when we started thinking about, and I know a lot of organizations started thinking about making risk-averse plans or their BCPs to ensure that the most strategic items were well covered, or they were kind of their different sources were looked into. And if there were no sources coming, in the local supply base, then these were actually stocked up and inventorized so as to take us for a long haul. So I think a few things that we saw and that possibly the industry saw as well, and how we managed is one that we kind of looked at the supplier base. So if that was something which was more impacted because of the disruptions on the ports or on the, as far as freight is concerned, the ocean freight or the air freight, then how do we quickly look at different options within the local supply base. That was one. The other thing was agile sourcing. So there have been instances where I'm sure a lot of people would have faced, a lot of organizations would have faced, where one of your suppliers gets impacted due to COVID, and there is no supplies coming through, and then you are left high and dry. So that's when the agility comes into picture. And I know a lot of organizations did that, where they actually scrambled through the options very quickly, set up the contracts and got their supply chains back into action. So that was something which was done. The third thing which I would really want to talk about is the relationship bit. I think the suppliers were impacted, the organizations that were manufacturing, for example, were impacted. However, the relationship played a key role. So all of us talk about SRM. That has been a buzzword over last many years. A lot of organizations have invested heavily into that. But the proof of the pudding came out in the distress times like these, when actually the organizations who had a good relationship management with their suppliers came out less scathed, if I can call it. Of course everybody was impacted, but they came out less impacted, or less concerned due to disruptions, and they managed to run their show. So I think that's the third part. And one more element which I want to talk about before I close my part on this one is planning. I think planning is a pedestal on which the whole strategy was hinged. So earlier there used to be a long-term planning, there was demand planning, but the moment this epidemic hit us, we moved into a very nimble, very agile kind of a planning where we were looking, or I know a lot of other organizations were doing as well. They were looking at last 1 week sales, or for that matter the demand for next coming week, and making sure that we are covering ourselves for that short term while we are looking at a longer term strategies. So the demand driven planning became a cornerstone of the strategy over last few months, and all of these put together, like I said, securing the supplies, making the procurement more agile, more communicative, working on the supplier relationship bit, and I think that a lot of people extensively built on top of that, and the planning, which was much more, I would say, much more short term, but at the same time very specific and focus. That was the key to ensure that we come out of this disruption.
Tarun, that's interesting. As you brought the element of planning, most often demand planning is not brought about by procurement forums, and they start looking at categories and they stop there. But it has been a very interesting single day, single minute plan I hear from your supply chain head. Can you really tell us how that was designed and how it really impacted the procurement, resiliency? I think we should have talked a little later, but as you have raised the issue of demand planning on the demand front, what are the deductions that you derive from such kind of demand planning changes into your procurement and production plans?
Yeah. So let me talk a little bit about spend management before I go into the demand planning bit, because I think that two are interrelated. So I think what we also did as an organization is look at our spends, and not that we were not looking at our spends management before COVID, but that this is one time when actually we dwelled very deep into it, and we visualized what were our direct indirect spends, what were our spend categories, if there were some strategic spends, there were some tail spends, and we ensured that the demand that is coming up for the short term, we are all covering the spends irrespective whether it's strategic or tail spend to cover that demand, right? So I would say these two are interrelated, and during this period we made a few choices, and we had discretions in terms of what we're going to buy, whether it's even if it might have been a tail spend, but we chose to buy that because that was impacting my immediate demand. And even if it was a strategic spend, we took a call that we'll keep it a little later and cover it later when the things start to open up. So that's one. The second thing that we did was prioritized our spends in terms of based on the demand. So if there is, for example, if there is a requirement of more of operation spend, instead of putting more capital, if there were any capital plans, we moved to operations bit of it, ensuring that the factories or the supply chains were uninterrupted. All know that during this period the cost of freight went up, for example, right? So ensuring that we are meeting the demand plan even in spite of having a increase in the cost of freight, but at the same time making sure that we are cutting it somewhere else. So that is the level of details that we went into in terms of the spend management. And thirdly, I would say work very constructively with suppliers. So when it all started, we knew that's going to impact us, not to this extent, nobody knew that, but to a certain extent was going to impact us. And we started to communicate with suppliers right in the beginning, saying that if it's going to happen, what is it going to be plan A, what's going to be plan B, where it's going to be coming from, how do you give it, if there's a lockdown, then is there a way for us to manage that, given that some of us were in the essential categories. So a lot of work went there, and every day when the demand was generated, we were ensuring that whatever was required for that demand was taken care of in the background by these three strategies that I talked about, which is dwelling very deep into this spend, prioritizing this spend, and working very constructively with the suppliers. I hope that answers to a certain extent.
Girish?
See, interesting that we speak of spend at the beginning itself, and one of the major the Hackett Group did a research which revealed that top performing organizations recognize that a strong relationship between procurement and business partners can create significant spend influence. So the question that we probably need to also look at now is, given that we have the pressures of maintaining a healthy bottom line, given that we are also looking at SKU rationalization, because at every forum today we are talking about SKU and SKU rationalizations. And also we are talking about suppliers falling out of the site, and then we need to rush in new suppliers. Given all this, what is the direction in which you see spend going, spend analysis going, and spend analytics going? Probably this time we could, Jayakrishnan could look at it. Tarun did talk about spend and how spend, they looked at spend and categorized spend and did a analysis on it, and then tried to figure out what I am wanting, what I would like to probably explore is that what from here, how do we do it? Because almost all organizations have some kind of spend analytics place.
Gaurav, can you take us through?
Gaurav?
Yeah.
You have to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead.
See, the spend analysis was part of the earlier procurement days, not before COVID as well, because most of the company bases on several strategies based on their spend, and there are PPVs program, which is a kind of key objective of any procurement team. So those spend based on the different categories. Suppose in pharma industry, if you talk about the major spend junk from imports through China and the critical raw material categories, then there is a lab consumable and indirect sourcing procurement categories as well. So we had means in terms of sourcing team, always those tools in line with the monthly requirements and the quarterly reviews to show to the management and board. Yes, obviously that analytics part came into the picture in more important when we categorize the material through post-COVID session. What are the priorities to be taken care in terms of the supply assurance? So those categories where we have kind of challenges in terms of supply issues or COVID issues being catered in a different manner. Being essential goods of pharmaceutical, we had never faced kind of challenges in terms of the supplies, because the team were aligned to give the permissions and the take extra special approvals to run the show, because there were the provision given by the local governments to the various cities and areas where they have given the permission to run the show to supply the essential goods to the essential companies like pharmaceutical. So coming back to your answer is this: yes, we had a tool of spend analytics which was in place, and it helped a lot to take immediate actions on the category wise, so that we can assure the supplies to the organization.
All right, but I have one small question to you, Gaurav. That the spend analysis, how well are they linked to the larger demand requirement, and how do you ensure that there's a balance between demand and supply even during the normal period? And how did you ensure this during the COVID?
So see, doctor, it is directly correlated to your revenue, because when you map and track the revenue based on your all products, key products, and then how much is the spend going to those particular products. If you calculate and map your top 10 or top 50 products, and then you can secure your revenue with providing either inventory or the supply assurance, or there is a kind of some risk analysis which is depend on the alternate sourcing development, or there are several steps behind it. So once you align with your top revenue and your all 80-90% of the revenue is aligned with your raw material, then you have a kind of spend analysis tool where you can easily link to your secure your revenue first. And then it's more on the COVID, after COVID, since this is a pharmaceutical and the raw material suppliers are also being essential goods. So they were be also aligned to the all strategic plan, which has been shared to all of main manufacturers and main strategic partners, because they always keep the demand planning of at least rolling of 3 months and 6-month demand planning in a fixed manner, where they can also be assured some business, and then they have a clear idea of how much business allocation to them. So you need to be always aligned, not in the COVID scenario, in terms of all the normal scenario as well. You need to be always aligned with the normal forecast to the vendors, so that they have a kind of contractual, assurance of this business with you. Hope I am answering your question.
All right, yeah, that's fine. Let me take you to Ashish. Ashish, you come from one of the most essential services. Everybody needs it every day in the morning, right? What are your, basic issues with supply side dynamics? Because this is one thing which is needed by everybody, should not be impacted at all. But how did COVID impact your supplies, and what were the response of Colgate-Palmolive in managing that particular situation? And what are the current challenges also, so that we can move into the next level of debate?
Thank you so much. First of all, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you guys.
Yeah, can you be a little louder?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, now it's better.
Okay, perfect. So coming to your point, yeah, absolutely. I think our industry is one of the most essential thing. Everyone would love to use that product and need to use that product perhaps twice in a day. But again, I think this is one of the reality which started coming in as the whole pandemic evolved, and I think that might be a common theme for everyone, that while a particular industry is essential, however, the rest of the supply chain and your partners and the partners or suppliers to those suppliers are not typically classified into, and you won't think them that they are part of an essential supply chain. So this was the one of the biggest reality check that started coming in, and I think it was not a reality check for a company like us alone or the companies on this panel, but I think it was a reality check for the entire nation and the bureaucracy as well. And if all of us think back to last 3 months in terms of the different notifications that has started coming in, so the things which started coming in, that a transporter is not necessarily someone is carrying an essential good is essential. The whole the network in which the transport system moves, even if they are taking capital goods, white goods, they are part of that ecosystem, and that ecosystem has to move to be able to move the essential goods and deliver those essential services to the end consumer. So that was one of the biggest reality check, and I think that is where and I think the panelists talked about the relationship. For us, again, the biggest learning and biggest, I would say, aha moment was that the relationship which says in these tough times. So I think what helped us is that we had a very, very transparent communication with all our key partners, that this is the situation. You need to tell us that how are your factories operating, how are your suppliers operating, what are the things that we can help you to justify your to your authorities that you are part of the equal essential supply chain. And I think that's where it leveraged out. So it was sort of a common thread which was formed across different associations, different companies, to make sure that that the broader authorities understands that things have to move in tandem. So that was part of the first thing, that how do you have that kind of a collaboration. And the other thing is, we talked about digital. I think one of the advantage in this is, and one of the advantage as we speak right now is the digitalization at least have moved to such a pace that a lot of jobs and a lot of things can be done remotely, including this webinar. So what happens is, or actually what the reality is, 3 months back, work from home was sort of a niche reality. Okay, someone wants to work from home, you will assign some hours or at max perhaps a day in a week that someone can do a work from home. But today it has proven to be sort of a business reality, and that is not just a reality for us, that also tested our supply partners, because the reality is that a lot of information that everyone was looking for is sitting into the information chain. Do they have access to their computers? Does their team have access to to their ERP system to be able to provide us when the material is going to leave, when are they going to connect to our factory? So I think those were the realities which started coming in. And so those, for me, those are the two fundamental blocks, that how do you continue to invest into those relationships and have the transparency. And number two is, how do you continue to invest in the technology, which is not just you, but tomorrow also start looking, because a lot of us have talked about, and I think perhaps I'm just building it for the next answer. Second point is, how do we move forward for the next? So this would be the other check. In the past, we had always talked about suppliers, that, okay, how many factories they have, what is the kind of spare capacities that they have if tomorrow our demand surge. But I think as we will start looking in this, we will need to start thinking through that, do they have the right kind of a technological capabilities? Do they have the right kind of a spread out network? And do they have the right kind of a spread out sourcing options, which might perhaps not be so cost optimal, but might be necessary when it comes to a crisis like this or something else unfolds tomorrow. So those would be my...
Ashish, that's well put up. I think two basic elements of your
I think Dr. Singh is facing some technology issues. If we were to take this again, Ashish, I couldn't agree more with you when we talk about the twin issues that you flagged about. And so I think one of the things that we also need to bring into the table is probably understanding of supply risks and how supply risks can pan out. We have all been having risk management as some part of our corporate DNA, but we have never focused it in a way which creates resilience in our supply team as a requirement for it. So if we can also look at creating that resilience in the team, and probably help us understand how going forward supply resilience can form a core of procurement strategies, and not only your tier 1, tier 2, but also probably your suppliers or somewhere down the line, your chain itself. How do you understand those risks across your chain and evaluate those risks, and probably also be a mentor to your suppliers so that they can also be aware of the risk. So probably, Sachin, if you could also look at this issue. I think Dr. Singh is again back.
Let me add a little few things to this. What I was saying, what Girish has gone a step further to that, was that during such period of crisis, you find that from your factory to your supplier to your sub-suppliers to tier 1, 2, 3, 4, there's always a bullwhip, and the bullwhip effect is negative. There's some noise from somewhere. So the bullwhip effect is negative. And Sachin, if you can just slightly mute and then unmute after I finish. All right. So bullwhip effect is very effective. If you see that there are less demand, then your sub-tier will start reducing the production, and they start reducing the production, and there's a negative bullwhip. When you really lockdowns are lifted, then you are in deep trouble. Is this kind of situation being faced by organization or Indian organization post 4 months, when the unlockdown has begun and is taking forward despite the COVID cases riding, and there are a lot of issues on the demand side of it? So Sachin, if you could really look at that as a question.
Sure. So interesting, just to add to the various perspective expressed by all of you. You all have been in the businesses where you have got impacted on the supply side, and you had to ensure that your supply to your customers gets continued. In our case, we had a mix of both demand disruption as well as supply disruption, because we are into oil and gas business primarily, wherein because of lesser vehicles on the road, there was a shortage in demand. So you need to also look at the strategies for optimizing your inventories, so that in those products where the demand is shrinking, you are able to manage your inventory and cash flow for funding into the products where your demand has suddenly become strong. In this larger context, when you look at the current pandemic, it was global pandemic. So in this situation, for you to really work out a conventional methods for solving a problem or on, let's say, supply of a raw material or anything, can't be done in a traditional or conventional manner. For example, in our case, there were certain chemicals which globally are made only in Wuhan. And there are 3 producers, all 3 of them located only in Wuhan. So in that situation, how do you really secure it? And in those times, we were lucky to have a very capable R&D team with us, who really looked at that how do we really reformulate our product in such a way that I can avoid usage of that particular material. So complete replacement in such a short, stressful time, really applying themselves and coming out with those options. So that's where one of the interesting strategy for both procurement as well as supply chain is to really look at problems in a collaborative manner with help of departments like R&D, working together with teams in finance, so that you can look at the problem in a much more lateral manner and really crack the options. Now, when we look at the bullwhip effect of the demand, wherein suddenly it is stopped and then suddenly it again surges back. To solve this kind of problem, again, it depends upon that how much of global reach or let's say the global supplier base you have, so that you can source demand whenever there is a disruption in any of your suppliers. Because even for over the next 3 to 4 months, we are not out of the problem yet. And in this situation, it is always better for every organization to look at their supply base. In case there is a problem at one, you should be in a position to really quickly resume with the other, which indirectly basically means that these would be the times when one should really look at increasing the safety stocks, or let's say the increasing the inventories in the system, so that under any situation you don't get impacted. Now, for taking that decision, having much more sharper understanding of demand in B2C, yes, it is still with some thumb rules, but in case of B2B businesses, it becomes a little bit more challenging and interesting field to really work on.
All right. In fact, Sachin, that you have put up very well. I also will go to Aadya now, who sees from also oil and gas. Aadya, what has been your continuity plan post-COVID lockdown, and what has been the the way? What is the way forward for your organization in terms of procurement?
So thank you, Dr. Singh. Unfortunately, I'm not able to switch on my webcam. There is some issue which I've been trying to fix, but that's not working. But I hope my audio is clear.
Yes, yes.
All right, great. So, very apt question, and I'll just start quickly with sharing some of the statistics. I was going through a research based by a London-based company, which talked about what is the reaction of some of the CPOs post-COVID and the preparedness that they were looking at. And the research says that only 72%, that only 4% of the CPOs had a disaster management plan in place to handle a situation like this. 96% were caught unaware. And in fact, more than 90% of the CPOs have faced supply disruptions in the past 12 months. So the last 12 months have taught us a lot of things, in terms of not just instability because of the current pandemic, but beyond that also because of the geopolitical reasons and the other uncertainties that are currently arising, which we may be term as which are the known unknowns, and how do we manage that? So very important to have a disaster management plan or a BCP plan to manage your supply chain in times like these. And this is becoming challenging because two things, what we saw in our organization, why we felt this was very, very challenging currently in the whole thing, is that most of the procurement managers or the category managers in our company did not have the complete visibility of the supply chain. That means beyond the tier 1 suppliers, where are the risks and who manages those risks is something which is not known. So once if you don't know, how do you even address those kind of risks? So in times like these was when you try to find out what are the bottlenecks and how do we try to do that. Then that was primarily because we did not have a business continuity plan in place. And the second reason which I felt was one of the biggest reasons why we could not were not ready. Most of the organizations were not ready was because of the complexity of the the kind of problems that are cropping up in the last, if you look at the last 2 years, we've had number of issues, right from, we've talked about all kind of nationalization sentiments, we've got about the geopolitical issues, we've got this pandemic, then there have been natural calamities which have impacted supply chains. So the awareness and how do we handle this situation has caught up many organizations unaware. For our organizations, yes, this has been quite a realization that we needed to have a more robust systems. But fortunately, what our dependency on one region has been very low. We've got a very, very diverse supply chain coming from different parts of the globe, so not dependent on one region per se. And secondly, the suppliers we work with, particularly coming from oil and gas, are experts in their field, and they are very niche kind of suppliers. We work with large global organizations who have their own risk management in place, because of which we were able to quickly trigger our BCPs and did not face a very, very crucial supply chain disruption. So
all right,
this
thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
No, so this is what I just wanted to, in summary, talk about how our organization steered through this, navigated through this pandemic, and what are the areas we want to focus on, and which is quite similar to most of the global procurement organizations. When we look around, we find that this is the biggest challenge which is being faced by the procurement leaders all across the globe.
All right, thank you very much, Adya, for that.
The top agenda for
summary.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Now let me go back to Jayakrishnan. He has been waiting for long. Jayakrishnan, I will, start with a kind of questions which have actually come from the audience, which supplements our debate which has been going on and adds little more value. With the supplies being impacted, how is substitution strategy being applied in your organizations to secure a supply basis? Because securing a supply basis have been a very important element. Most of us have talked about it, but in your case, how has business continuity plan and securing supply basis with substitution strategy, if there has been any?
Yeah, I think a good question to be posed at this era. Hope I'm audible.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. So coming from a food background, I would say some points which I would like to add on with all the speakers, what they have contributed, is something on the food safety and on the food integrity side. So that's something which becomes a very important element, which cannot be missed out in any kind of situation or any type of situation, I would say. So now when we talk about specifically to the pandemic and what kind of substitution strategy we have worked on, it's definitely not that easy in the food era. Like being from a global company, believe me, if I ask somebody from within the organization about what is a so-called policy for change. People would say, like, some region would come and tell me it would take 3 months. Some would say it would take 4 to 5 months. So it all depends on what kind of category, what kind of product that we are looking into substitution. So substitution, having said that, it's sometimes becomes easy if it's a very like if it's a common product, if it's an ingredient which is not having much of sensitivity around it. But if it comes to core product substitution, believe me, there is a lot of work to be done on it. That is what I want to submit. Like,
I think, Tarun, if you can supplement this question, because I see you people have done a lot of substitution locally, even in terms of ingredients that goes into your what is it called, as I forget the name. But
yeah, so we are into breakfast cereals, yeah, correct. So
yeah.
So I think I'll agree with what Jayakrishnan said. There's no such one solution that fits all, and different organizations, and for that matter similar organization in different regions would react differently to that. But what we did see was that during this time, if you were actually keen to look out at solutions or securing alternate supplier bases, these were available. So in the sense that for us there were few commodities that were that we went into trouble because of some disruptions, and we were not working on developing alternates for those commodities in the past, because we thought we had a very stable supply. But since that happened, since the disruption happened, we quickly scouted the options, and we really found the options, and it worked well for us. So I think what it says is that what it tells us is that this is possibly the reaction in the pandemic. However, the alternate supplies, or having a secured supply base where you have more than one options available is always going to be one thing that's going to be extremely critical for a stable supply chain. In our case, it worked well. I can assume that in certain other cases, like in the oil and gas, the gentleman was saying, it couldn't have worked well because all of them were coming from the same place. But I guess that's going to be something which is going to be critical for the supply chains to be stable and long lasting in the normal era as well. And that's something which we have to put a lot of focus on.
All right, thank you very much. I think the debate has been very interesting, and also there has been organizations which have moved to take advantage of the existing facilities to diversify their portfolio. How easy was it to diversify and take care of the ingredients or the supplies that was needed to manufacture those, and what were the critical problems that emerged during that period of time? Radha, if you can talk about it, a little bit of that.
Right. Doctor, I think coming to the point, everybody has mentioned what are the issues which had been, organizations have gone through. Now, if you look at it, they can be categorized. There were, as I mentioned, there were the combination of supplies, there were combination of the physical movement of the people or the goods, etc. Whatever were the issues, kind of thing. I think the main strategy with the company who have successfully gone through this one have been, I would divide into different categories. One is the partnership and the collaboration. I think that is something which has resolved many issues during this pandemic. To give you the example, now there were, I think somebody has already covered it. I think Ashish talked about it, that you fall into the essential commodity for, let's say, Dettol. For my organization, it falls into essential commodity which government has given. Now it is your duty to work along with the suppliers and get them classified as well, also whatever they are manufacturing for you as essential as well. And I think it worked out very well, not only to the tier 1 supplier, but to tier 2 suppliers as well. And it's my own experience that government was quite supportive in terms of giving them that status. So that's something which you are partnering with them, number one. Number two is they might have a capability, and for sure, you can't have all the capabilities in your organization, but you need to build upon with your partners that your capability one and capability two could be built upon to give the multiplying impact to the entire business. I think that was the second thing which brought out magical results, doctor, into this pandemic. Third thing is that how you were prepared. I see the many panelists talking about the alternate suppliers. That's one. But what about alternate raw material? What about alternate packing material? Now, do you have bomb one, bomb two, bomb three? Now, that's as per the criticality which you have gone through in the past, and you say in normal condition, this is bomb one, which is cost effective. Of course, supply chain is very, very too focused on the cost, and they have to be. I mean, keep it aside, that discussion. However, are you ready to go to the cost two? Are you ready to go to the cost three now? It is not only the cost, but it is also that which suppliers are supplying you. Now, again, I come to my point that globalization took place. Everybody rushed for it. Now we are thinking, do we have to reverse it? Now, these bomb one, bomb two, bomb three could have a component of that as well. That's something which is cheapest comes from China, of course, that's fine. However, your bomb two has something which is not China. You are not heavily dependent on China, but there is something else coming from somewhere. Now, rider over here is, you might not be cost effective here, right? Number three is, even if you talk about that these ingredients coming in, you need to talk about the financial stability of the suppliers, the capability of the suppliers, and this supplier, because of the overheads, etc., might not be cost effective, mind you. However, in the longer run, when you have to continue the supplies, this supplier might come to your rescue. So what we have been seeing, that a pre-preparation which could have gone into this one. Few companies had it, few didn't have it fully, few had it halfway through kind of thing. And I think everybody was not fully prepared. I must accept it. But the organizations which were continuously working in phases in building up this resilience or business continuity plan, or I should say business immunity plan in today's terms, if I could say, I think they have come out with some options with speed. And that's where I say, I think in the market, when you go today in the pandemic situation, I'll just take 1 minute, doctor, who are the organization who have done better than others, right? Who have done better than others is number one, who have gone with the speed. They had system and processes who allowed them to go to the market with the speed, number one. Number two, who were flexible. I don't get my palm oil from Malaysia because my ports are totally choked up. I have PFAD in India to buy. And then that is bomb two, and my soap continues supplies. That's another thing. So flexibility is another thing. And third thing is innovation. Completely, I know in this kind of situation, whatever you do, whatever you plan, you will fall into a situation where you don't have a ready-made solution. Let's accept it. And that's where the innovation of the organization comes into picture, whereas the CFTs, which are the cross-functional team, work together. And there are examples to quote where the people have done wonders, that how they have innovated and ensured that the supply is there very much in the plan. So just to conclude it, I think the organization who have worked with the speed, flexibility, and also with innovation have really edged over others. And we have Indian examples to quote, and they are in media. Thank you so much.
I think Radha, you actually brought about a very important, DNA of supply chain resilience policies in future and in present too. And because I've been seeing that people have had very different approaches, and different companies have been having different approaches, and they hope is not a business strategy, and wishing that bad things don't occur is not a successful risk management plan. In a globalized world with ever longer and more complex supply chain, populated with numerous trading partners, many things can indeed take place to disrupt the transfer of raw material, parts, finished goods, and information. Each of those depend upon. And I think what really holds true is that you need education, you need incentive, rewards, and preferred status, and financial stability and productivity. In fact, one of the study by a Harvard professor, MIT professor, indicates that it says that Ford Motor during this earthquake, Japan earthquake of 2011, had the biggest challenge not from tire 1, tire 2, tire 3, tire 4, but from one tire at the end, that is 11th or 12th tire, which only affected 2% of these essential supplies, where you never looked at them in the normal period of time because you never thought they were really, and they disrupted that for almost 8 weeks production. Think about, a kind of mapping that is important. And hence, Radha, I think you take us to the next round of questions where there has been a lot of, discussion on, as Aadya really said, geopolitics. I think we have been seeing the geopolitics of China in a very different way post-pandemic and along the pandemic. When we depend on a single source, what are the challenges? In fact, are there alternatives? That's the second question. What happens if the options are alternative are in the single source country? Right? How do we really map those risks? And I think Radha gave some examples of that, and that's very important. So second, we say diversify, have as diversified supply base as it is possible, so that you can meet the resilience. I think pandemic can affect anybody. I know ITC has a supply from China, but largely it's a supply from UK and US, and they were more affected in the later part where China actually picked up. So I think the pandemic has no geography and no timeline. It can occur anywhere and it can affect. So diversify the supply base may be another way. And the last one, which essentially is where people are talking about localization of the supply bases and local as we go in India. I think this is something which is a very interesting debate from the macro perspective. And all of you must be thinking in one direction or another. I've also read somewhere that there's a lot of political pressures that are coming on governments to move out of China. There are a lot of political angle to moving out of China also, just not local and securing a supply basis. And businesses will not behave as the government behave, and hence there is a lot of education that government needs to be going through from the businesses, saying that what is possible, what is not possible. So I think let me first raise the issue of how should businesses diversify their supply base? What are the diversification strategy that will take place from now onwards? So we start with the lady. Aadya, if you're there, if you have a view, please go ahead with it.
Certainly, thanks, Rakesh. I think beyond just the dependency on one vendor, I think single vendor situation is one of the biggest heartache of all the procurement professionals. But sometimes it is really requirement of the business that you can't avoid to deal with a single vendor situation, and diversification is what you need to do. One of the things that we have been doing very successfully at Cairn is to develop local suppliers, and secondly, the focus on partnerships. So there is a lot of focus on supplier relationship management, and it's beyond SRM. We are not talking about the typical SRM. It is really collaborative, where we are bringing in, supplier-led innovation. How we can, innovate or provide situations in a situation where supplies get disrupted. However, there have been very good success stories that we've had in our company where, under the current pandemic, the suppliers have really gone beyond themselves and come up with solutions to meet our requirements and supply to us. So beyond first is of course a long-term strategy of how do we diversify, which of course is a long-term thing. I think most of the organizations currently are talking about and trying to move from a single vendor situation. But there are situations where you are tied to an OEM or one of those situations. So how do you engage with those partners at a very strategic level, that you do not talk to them as partners, but as vendors, but as partners, and co-solve a solution. And that's where the solutions come in, and which are much more effective, which are much more, in terms of cost also, they give you much more, lots of benefits. And thirdly, they can be scaled up for the future as well. So once it is developed, your whole way of looking at things can change. I'll just share with you an example, maybe without going into too much specifics, is about some chemical that we source from China, and there's a dependency on one of the vendors. While the focus has been to diversify and look at developing partner vendors in India, so far it was not possible. Of course, there is a change management, and there is there's a constant friction with the technical teams about changing the specifications, which is very core to getting the right quality of oil. But when you're forced into such a situation, they say necessity is the mother of invention, and that's when you look at different ways of how can you go around that situation and come up with a solution which can beat the single vendor situation.
All right, thank you. Girish, you have anything to say on that?
A couple of issues that actually come up. Single vendor and single sourcing is sometimes inevitable in terms of how we have gone about developing that vendor, and there might be certain IPR related issues which could impact your procurement strategies. If we leave that aside, wherever there's an IPR involved, and increasingly we are seeing a situation where the suppliers own a lot more of IPR, and they help you with a lot of innovative processes. They help you with innovative systems and solutions. So when we have that kind of a dependency on your supplier, then diversification becomes very difficult. More than single sourcing, I think what we have to keep in mind is that single source in a specific geographical locality. If I have a single source, but the single source has got capability of producing it in multiple geographies, I think there again we will not have major issues when it comes to sourcing. But yeah, when IPR is involved, there will be serious issues, and I think that also is something that we will need to address in some industries, especially oil and gas industries, some technology industries, automobile. These are industries where there's a lot of IPR-led developments happening. So there we will have we need to have a different kind of strategy going forward. And I think that will be core to how we look at single sourcing. Right. Toyota, for all its things, have still focused on having single sourcing for a lot of its components in spite of the Thai floods. They insisted that the supplier put up a plant in another location and diversify the production base. So probably that's something that we also need to look at.
All right, Gaurav, do you have a comment on that? You come from a pharma background, and I think the diversification or localization is more important there. But what do you think of single versus diversified strategy as of now?
Yes, doctor. So before I will give you the answer to the single and diversify, I would just like to keep people know that there is around 3 decades before, there were the manufacturing of raw materials of synthetic reaction with chemicals in India. That has been shifted to China around 3 to 4 decades before, where those capabilities of the Indian vendor has been, not so much of explore at that time, so that they have to shut down their units, and all the buyers and all the industry segment moved to the China for those kind of the raw materials and chemicals. Now see, because as we always said, this COVID is always giving us a learning in terms of various fields. So this is also one of the major field where now people are thinking to come back, bring back the business to the Indian manufacturer, small MSME industries who can again cater those kind of requirements to the Indian industries. But again, this is only a learning which right now is a very fresh learning for all the industry, and they want to again bring back the again for as any cost. Yes, for a pharmaceutical industry or any formulation or any biological company, they should have a kind of diversify vendor base always. But there are, as Girish said, there are some strategic, very important and very critical material where we can depend on the single source, even though if there is a contractual arrangement or if there is a kind of built-up management for those particular supplier. Suppose people are now talking to bring back the manufacturing to the India. There are the scheme last month announced by the Indian government for India move forward to the pharma hub, and this scheme is to mitigate the risk of the 52 APIs from the China and other import countries. Now, like that, the schemes are available, the government supports are available. Now, only the thing is, industry and the buyers has to put in a kind of contractual assurance to them, so that they can also feel that this field is not going to be a last again after 2 years or 3 years, short term. Suppose tomorrow China will come back again and then they say now price is again dropped down, there is no COVID, the pandemic is over, everything is fine. So the industry move to again back to the China, and then there is a problem to the Indian manufacturer who are right now investing so much of efforts here. Government is investing so much of efforts now. So we have to be a very strict or very kind of mandate policy to the industries where we have a kind of diversification. We are not saying that completely China stop is the solution. So if tomorrow if there is something went wrong in your Indian country or there are the territories where you have putting those plant of chemical, like suppose there are some Maharashtra and Gujarat belt. So how you are going to ensure a life-saving drugs or a pharmaceutical things to be manufactured continue smooth? You have to diversify anyhow, because you cannot depend on the single territory at any cost. So moving completely out from the China is also not a solution. Yes, but developing the Indian manufacturing capability is also a must need now. So every industry has to support that.
All right. I think this is a very important, discussion points which gets ignored. The government came very strongly on local policies. So I think I open the debate for everybody here. Whoever wants to come in quickly can really comment on this. Anybody who wants to come from the panel?
Yeah, I'll just talk about a little bit on this one. So I think diversification is really need of the hour, but also I think it also depends upon the length and the breadth of the organization, or how it is structured. For example, I know a lot of FMCG companies, they have operations in different countries and they have suppliers who supply them locally in those countries. And these are some of the ingredients or some of the packaging material that are common. So and I also know that there is now a network that has been created across the geographies for the similar kind of materials. So I think it's important now to build those relationships with those suppliers which are in different countries, because given that you are impacted due to your incumbent supplier, however you know that the similar kind of material is being supplied to some other region or some other country in say Southeast Asia, or say for that matter in Australia. Is there a possibility to quickly get the material moving from that source, right? So I think that kind of networking with the larger supply base is also the need of the hour. I think the problem is not so much that the suppliers are not available, at least when I speak from the FMCG or food industry point of view. I think it's more about engaging with them and kind of starting some kind of a relationship or association. Because in the past or till before the pandemic hit us, we were all in that mode where we were happy with the supplier base that we had done for us locally. However, now it's a time that you start to spread your influence with these other suppliers as well, and try to engage with them and get them going. I think that's one element that I just wanted to bring in as well.
That's good. I think anybody else? Yes, Jayakrishnan?
Yeah, I would just like to echo what Gaurav and Girish just was mentioning. And this is more around like a single source. I would say a properly risk-assessed single source is not something which we can absolutely like ignore it. It is reliable today as proper as a single source. I would say it's reliable, but today when it comes to a single source with a single origin, that becomes more of an odd combination. Because today, being in food, like China is definitely like posing a lot of problems in terms of supplies, and it could range from different types of issues. For example, like a supplier who has been dealing with LC 60 days, they have suddenly told that with the regulatory body in China enforcing certain things on them, now they're asking for 100% TT advance. So these could be some ground level examples to state. And as a company policy, maybe we may not be dealing with any advance. So how do we tackle such situation? So a single source and a single supplier, single supplier and a single origin is an odd combination. Even if in case of a single supplier having multiple manufacturing locations, may be something which is actually like which can actually support a business continuity plan, I would say.
Yeah, that becomes diversified even from a single source. It becomes diversified. Yeah. Anybody, Radha? You have anything?
I also would like to add here. Probably now.
Let Radha talk, then Ashish can come in.
Thank you. I think one of the things which keeps coming in, I think we are discussing very clearly, is the dependency on single sourcing. Looking at the long-term strategy, I think I won't write it off completely. Single sourcing, I mean, saying that it is the only devil in the supply chain, I would differ from that concept a little bit, because it depends also that even if you have the single sourcing, which kind of material it is, and you have the parallel available material for this, what is the reliability of that supplier, what kind of partnership you have, because mind you, the service and priority you get from the supplier also depends on the share of business you share with him. If you are a big share in his supplies, maybe there are a lot of partnership, lot of collaboration in the long term, which you cannot simply bypass. That's number one. Number two, when we are talking about the diversification, I think, and the local, vocal for local, which doctor is mentioning, and there is a lot of buzzword about it, is that also that what we are saying is from global, when the globalization started, everybody went for the globalization. Now you will find there is a category of the raw materials which comes globally from a pocket. For example, dyes and pigments comes from China, all across the globe. Similarly, fragrance, it comes from a pocket of a country, pocket of a world. Now there are pockets which are created for particular kind of category of the raw materials over a period of time. That's where the globalization took place and why it happened, and that's how you see the cost coming down. How in spite of globalization, high logistics cost, etc., costs are coming down because there are pockets for fragrance. It is produced there, economies of scale, and then the costs are coming down. It's very simple. Now, when we are talking about take a U-turn, are we talking about taking a U-turn on globalization? I think it's a slow U-turn. That you can't come from globe to total local. We need to pass through a phase that is this global comes to a regional. Maybe we reduce what is coming from far Latin, it comes to the regional South Asia country, maybe Vietnam, maybe Philippines, somewhere over there. And then in the phase two, maybe it comes even to the local kind of thing. So the point I'm driving is that yes, again, single sourcing is not a devil, globalization is not a devil. We need to take a call and produce those pockets which reduce the supply continuity or disruption, which we have been talking in a planned manner. And it could be a phased manner going from globalization to regionalization, and then maybe coming to the local kind of thing. And that might give you a, some kind of breathe in terms of the preparation as well. And in process, you will be able to produce even the business continuity plan as well as multi-sourcing as a outfall of what strategy you are taking for a longer term. Thank you.
All right, Radha. Let's go to Sachin. Sorry, Ashish.
No, I think, I just wanted to have a couple of add-ons to this. I think the whole panel has talked enough on the single sourcing, and there's no I mean, I completely go to the comments that that panel had. I just had one add-on, perhaps. And there is a lot of course, push and thrust on the localization, like vocal for local or localization. I think one of the other dimension that we need to think through is, as we are looking at these suppliers who might be able to produce at local, beyond price, do they have the right kind of a capabilities and systems? Because what the whole conversation tomorrow should not start moving to a point of pricing, because that's a very unsustainable scenario. Tomorrow, any other country can give an added subsidies, add different infrastructure, added a different credit lines, and the whole equation. So I think the reason why perhaps some of the key manufacturing avenues which India lost out over a period of time was price was one of it, but also that the suppliers did not keep up with the technology change. They could not bring up with the right kind of an innovation in their manufacturing systems, in their plants, in their supply chain, which the bigger world could, with the rest of the world perhaps could do it with much more economies of scale. So I think the conversation now, as we will be looking after for options, are the suppliers thinking more aloud, or are they looking at this more of a tactical play, that this is working into just because they have been provided a constrained boundary, so they are able to operate. So I think that's where the real potential we will need to assess, and I think that's going to be another conversation as we start thinking on debottlenecking.
Thank you, Ashish. Sachin, can you have your views on this?
So 2 points. Number one, we need to also give cognizance to current situation is an exceptional situation. So whatever we see and observe in exceptional situations should not define our way of doing things day to day. Like what Radha was saying, that if you suddenly go in from global to local overnight, you will lose all the good part of it, correct? Or let's say if you suddenly go for accumulating stocks from zero stock, you may later on face a stock loss. So that's where probably we need to also be mindful of the fact that yes, this is once in a lifetime kind of an event which has happened. It is something which will never remain forever. So yes, we can draw some learnings and fine tune our approach, but drastically changing approach is something which is not advisable. Second fundamental point is that, and that's where probably ISCM can play a role here, is that during this pandemic period, in my limited capacity, I tried to create a network of various purchase team members across various companies, so that there could be something which might be access for me, and because my demand contraction has happened, I'm wanting to offload it. However, there could be somebody in the same country, same India, who might be running short of that particular material. And that's where somehow, if we have a procurement teams forum kind of a thing somewhere here, it can create that kind of an environment wherein people can really share with each other certain things. Now with GST, like in my earlier company when I was working for Aditya Birla Group in Thailand, whenever let's say some typhoon has happened or something, because Thailand is a small country where everything comes by imports. Most of the things are imported raw materials. And caustic soda is such a commodity which is a very basic material. So if I'm running short of caustic soda, I will borrow it from, let's say, Vinithai or from Asahi Group. And when my next parcel comes, I will give it back to them. Now, that kind of a situation in old tax regime was not there. But in current GST workflow, this can happen in a very straightforward manner. And that kind of a closely knit community building in procurement and supply chain field is something which is a need of the hour in our country. Because if any organization buys a raw material inputs, let's say any input expensive, their selling price is bound to be expensive. But through this kind of a networking, we can create a platform where people can really share with each other their pain areas, and people can really come forward and collaborate. It can create a massive advantage for the whole country as well as to every company in the country.
Businesses operate with their own sphere of influence. There's a tragedy that happens, and hence getting into a single platform would be a very very, very critical area. But I think we have looked at this particular domain well. And from a very academic perspective, will say that if you need to go local, then you need to think a little differently. And if Vikas can come, and we have not had Vikas for long, so if Vikas can come on that as to how do we go local, how do we make sure that we need to go local? Everybody is saying that, oh, single will be important, going local will be difficult. But I need to know, when should I go local? Where should I go local? For what kind of sourcing should I go local?
Yeah.
What is that decides that?
Yeah, Dr.
Yeah,
Singh.
Vikas.
We have talked a lot about the material part of the establishing the supply chain on the local side. But I would also like to touch upon the services side, which to ensure the business continuity. If we talk about,
can you be little louder, Vikas? We can't hear you.
Can you hear my voice now?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay. So I would like to brief also on the services side to ensure the business continuity. Just to give you an example, so we coming from the elevator industry, in this particular pandemic, we needed to keep the hospitals up and running, and we are having we are doing the maintenance of the elevators, and in the pandemic, because of lockdown, the workforce restriction was there on the movement side. So we were facing a lot of challenges in terms of, and we have never thought that travel-related restrictions would come before COVID. So after COVID, these kind of challenges were coming. And what we did is the workforce which was getting returned to their home places, we tried to find out that because we being a pan-India player, we found out the people from there. We picked out who are having small experience or less experience, and then giving them proper training and establishing the capability so that they can properly do the work. And that is how we need to develop the workforce. So in this current scenario, what I see is we need to go to the ground to check the capabilities of
Vikas, I'll get back to you a little later. You are not being heard, and your voice is cracking. What we really have to look at, and I think all of us have spoken. So I thought when you start about local, vocal in India, also there are 2 or 3 concerns. Do we have the ecosystem to support local despite the policy that has been set? You look at ease of doing business or logistics performance index, and I think we don't compare quite well with countries that have actually emerged as centers for sourcing. But there is always a possibility of going local. India is emerging. A lot of people are showing interest in India, and you see the kind of foreign capital coming in India is amazing. When you are in an exceptional situation, as Sachin rightly said, then you need to see also where your time to recover is faster than your time for survival. In any impact on any commodity, you need to do a stress test. And if you can do a stress test of commodities that you source from other countries, and you can find that, oh, this is one critical area where I need to buy or make in India. And whether I need to go vertical integrated or I need to buy over the counter, but I need to do it in a local environment. And I think there's a lot of these things that are happening, which can actually give us a very important distinction. So I think my take on this would be that I need to make a stress test assumption that whether we can pass the stress test, even in a pandemic like the one which we have, obviously single sourcing will remain. I think then it has actually benefited. Pandemics are exception. But when your time to recover is very high, and time to survival is lesser than time to recover, then that's where you need to really start thinking. And I think there is a very strong tool that is made up by MIT Center for Transportation and Logistics. I think one should really look at it. A lot of companies have been using it. Some of you may be knowing Resilink or Lamasoft have been doing that. So this is one. I also heard on single sourcing, I say that unless you have the capability to map the last tire tier 15, 18, 20, and 125, because as Radha said, your biome is different. Your bills of material are made up of bills of material are made up of bills of material, and hence it is a very complicated bills of material layers that you have. Do you really track them? A study in the Harvard Business Review right now said that, you know, it's we only track one or two, and we are very happy with it. Our relationships are one or two, as rightly all of you said, that having a strong collaborative nature of relationship with all the tiers, with preserving cash and supporting them with cash, and bringing, as Radha rightly said, bringing flexibility into the organization, because you know how procurement, we deal with some of you for training, and I think the way procurement comes into training and delays the payment and delay, you know, makes it very, very lengthy, is known to even academicians like us. But how quickly can we move into it? And companies now have moved very quickly into making decisions. And if you do that, you can support your collaborate tier 1 or tier 2 in a big way. In fact, Ford, from this study that I picked up from Yossi Steffi, he's a great guy. There's a book called Resilient Enterprises. And I think there's a classic literature on resilience, procurement that one can get on business continuity plan. He says that you may not really see what it is. Obviously, we need to move towards this. So we have done this part. Let me go to the last part of the debate. How strongly, and I think one of our panelists, Bansal, did bring about, and he started with that particular element of technology. Track and trace are very important. There's a question from Ishwar Padnaman, and Ishwar says that how do you, even other to the economic, environment, and social responsibility of current days, when environment, social, and government guidelines are coming for you to take care in future? How are you going to ensure that you're sourcing from an ethical source? You're sourcing the uncontaminated organic sources. You're sourcing without child labor, and so and so and so forth. How are you going to ensure that? And is that a mechanism that can be built up with even your risk strategy, and how technology can help? So I will start with Ashish on that, because Ashish brought about this in the beginning.
Sure. Thank you. And I think this is a very good question. And this time, and otherwise, even pre-pandemic, the ethical sourcing is something that majority all big organizations are talking about. So I would take it on the two dimensions. I think one of the things that a pandemic has taught us is a lot of things, and we talked about communication, and I would also add on to a layer about trust. I think what has helped us, I think the majority of the supply chains in last 3 months have been able to work because the trust that we have been able to develop with our supply partners and in turn to their supply partners. And I think that's the foundation of any conversation that we have on ethical sourcing, because somewhere we need to build that trust, and they need to understand what are the intentions that we have on the ethical sourcing, whether it is zero child labor, whether it is zero deforestation, whether it is the right kind of a palm oil. So we need to first be able to communicate and convey our expectations and the need very, very clearly. And I think we need to have the trust that the information that they would be working out would be in sync with that. That's a fundamental pillar. Having said that, of course, for any supply chain to, or for that matter, any chain to work, there has to be a layer of data on top of it. So as we speak, and I think that is where the other thing which is evolving, and I think same thing today, a lot of things have started evolving which was not think of 2 months, 3 months back, like something called a remote desktop assessment. So today there are assessments that your teams and the teams actually can do a very, very in-depth assessment sitting out of desktop on things that they are doing. And I think that is where the trust on the technology is really moving in. I know, and the technology is even moving to a point where there are GPS, where there are satellites who can actually tag in that what kind of a factory it is, how is the kind of a labor force it is moving in, what kind of a field it is sourcing in. So today it is moving in, and I think that's again a critical element that everyone is going to work on, that how do you use that better and better. So I think combination of these two, so there is no going back on the fundamentals. So you cannot walk away from the fundamentals of ethical sourcing. That's going to stay, and I think that's going to just go and elevate as we go forward. How do you start relying on your sourcing chain more and more And number two, how do you deploy your technology to a much better avenue versus what you were doing in the past? I think those were the two pillars to help you on that.
Tarun, I think there's also an interesting question on technology. I'm just building up because we may run out of time, so I'm also pulling the questions now. It says, please share examples of new technology adopted during the pandemic era for managing your supply chain and enhancing your supply chain planning.
Yeah.
We start with Tarun, but it can be taken by anybody. Because I think Ashish did clearly say that there's a use of technology which has helped few organizations to become more resilient. So I thought I would take it with you now.
So I'll quickly talk about technology in 2 or 3 aspects. So one is on the planning bit, like I said earlier. So, we invested into a new planning platform for ourselves, which is based on a demand-based planning. Now, it has not to do with pandemic because, we had planned to do that any which way and that. And actually, it brought in some great results for us during this time. I think in having, had we not invested into that technology, we would have been in a difficult situation because we were earlier working on a S&OP kind of a model, which was a little long term. I would say a month plus kind of a model. But what this technology helped us is to, make decisions on a daily basis about tomorrow, day after, and a week later. I think that's one that we did. And also, as an organization, we invested into, and we are investing rather into technology. So there was something around the network optimization, which is not per se to do with procurement, but generally on the overall efficient supply chain. And that also has brought us some good value in this period when everything we knew some cities were going under lockdown. So how do you service from city A to city B rather than the depot which is in city A which is already under say lockdown, for example. So all of those investments in technology, while like I said, we had thought of putting that in advance, but actually it helped us quite a lot during this period, and in absence of which it could have been really difficult to manage some parts of the pandemic.
All right, Aadya, you have any view on this?
Absolutely. So very similar to what Tarun was talking about in our organization, investments in data aggregation and analysis, and how to use this data analytics through digitalization to create a better visibility and foresight to conduct a robust risk assessment. So we invested in real-time information about all the partners or the critical partners that we engage with and getting their information on time. So to do a complete due diligence on the suppliers that we engage with. And because of that, the last 5 months have been quite, I would say volatile for the oil market, where there was a time when the oil prices were almost below $20 a barrel. A lot of our suppliers and down the supply chain actually were on the verge of that bankruptcy, or many really did wind up. So if you did not have that kind of due diligence, you do not know what is the health of your vendors that you're dealing with. It could lead you into very, very catastrophic situations. So to manage those, to invest in products or platforms which gives you visibility through an automated manner on the complete business risk, for the financial risk, for the complete risk, also on the on the human rights stuff. We are talking about the ethical sourcing. It also gives you insight about your suppliers, on the how they're doing with the modern slavery, or on the anti-bribery issues related to them. So you have all that information. Right now, there are lots of organizations which are offering these products, which can be embedded into your own ERPs or your whole that you're dealing with, and can give you real-time information about these critical suppliers. So these are very, very important.
All right, thank you. I think that's a good perspective. Let me add up to this, and people are talking about there's a question by Mr. Nandi saying that how are blockchains different? How are the blockchains going to make digital logistics more usable, secure, transparent, agile, and granular? And granular to make procurement processes managed pretty well. So let's start with Gaurav.
Yeah. So in a pharmaceutical industry, I would say, because there are more compliances already, even though we have a set parameter of compliances for logistics, even sourcing, even for all the changes of any kind of source or something. So we are not most of the impacted on those compliances due to the COVID or something, because we have all those kind of policies and procedure which need to be followed before going into any kind of logistic service provider. Because the pharmaceutical industry, there are some global SOPs which has to be followed, and then only you will be able to qualify them as a your logistic partner. The pharmaceutical, again, there are some more of the critical shipments when we say about the logistic for the cold temperature controlled shipments, where we cannot compromise in terms of the policies and the step and procedures to be followed by the any of the logistic service provider. Yes, the technology in terms of, yes, it is very important to track and trace. Yes, you need to have a kind of tools to monitor them. You can have a kind of blockchain where you have a real assessment of the turnaround time, how they are managing their turnaround time, and then what are the temperature control shipment being tracked at several points. So that
Right.
can be technology which can be real time data to your desktop, and then you can track and give the response to the regulated bodies or authorities who wants them to show as a compliance part.
Right,
So
Gaurav. I think that's a very important point, because we see from the pharma zone of GMR airport in Hyderabad to the belly of the aircraft, there is no compliance at all. Or when you move from a city to the Indian rural villages, I think the drugs lying in the small towns at Santee are no temperature compliant, and the composition has changed. Girish also is on the panel, and I would like to bring him here again to tell us the importance of blockchain in terms of integrated supply chain and procurement transparency. Quickly, Girish, in 2 minutes. Are you there?
I'm there.
Yeah.
I had muted myself. Essentially, when we talk of blockchain as a technology for procurement and the impact of this technology, what it essentially helps us to do, if we leave the trust part aside, which is not something that I want to deal with, or the payment part aside, it essentially creates a immutable trail which increases the track and trace capability that you have in your entire supply chain. What it lets you know at any point in time is that, has your supply chain been compromised over the distance that it travels, which is something in industries like food and pharma, where there could be a very huge impact on spurious products or adulterated products getting into the supply chains. Blockchain gives you the ability to ensure that whatever goes through your supply chain is assured in terms of what you guarantee it to be. And if there is any point in time that you have a violation of what you think is your norms, it clearly indicates at which point who was responsible for the violation, and therefore it's easier for you to then get into the diagnostics of it and identify the location from which these products enter into your supply chain. So it becomes a very crucial element within supply chain technology, which will assure you that your supply, what you promise is what you deliver in terms of the quality of the deliverable. So that's where I think blockchain has got a huge impact. It's nothing else but a piece of code which resides on multiple servers where data is exchanged seamlessly across your ecosystem. So as a technology, it's a simple technology. However, technology also has its ability to hype things up to an extent where it scares most of us from using it. It's a simple technology, useful for trace and track if we are able to harness it very clearly. So that would be my 2 minutes in.
I think blockchain is a distributed lag peer-to-peer technology which allows people to be, make their transactions, and nothing can be changed without a, a common consensus. If they are not on multiple nodes, they are democratic, and hence bring a lot of visibility into the system. And I think this is where the use of blockchain, as Girish rightly said, is going to be very important in terms of track and trace, and it also can help a lot of companies which are there into supply chain resilience solution provision, which can help companies also. I think we are still into the ERP based digital transformation. We are not moving beyond this. I think all these are hype in that sense, but they are truly innovative in the sense that if they can be used effectively, they can bring a huge amount of change in organization. I think we are running out of time, but I'll just give it to Radha, Mohan to comment on this quickly, and then take it to Tarun and close it.
Talking about, I think the technologies, various, Doctor, which we are having, I know the ERP people have done, and then talking about the blockchains and the big data, etc. I think the focus which is happening over here is, I think, again, as somebody talked about, it is among the it is external to organizations as well, and that's where it brings the question of security and how much access you want the people to give in the entire network which you have. And I understand that supply, you have lots of security built in, and you have lots of features which can be built into this one, which allow from party to party to give the access, because the intensity of the access which you are giving across also might vary from partner to partner and from the phases to phases kind of thing. But that capability is very much available. You will find in some of the multinational organization, especially, they are doing the experimentation into the in some of the countries. They are learning, they are having their own learnings, because mind you, while these are the very general technologies, these are to be customized basis the requirement which you have, and basis the which all areas you would like to cover to start with. It might not be that entire supply chain gets covered completely in one go.
Right.
It might be even into the phases. So as of now in India, I find that there are very few organizations who are doing it. However, the multinational organization, as a trial, in the phases they are doing into different countries, the learnings are getting consolidated, which will be percolated down across the globe. So these are things
Thank you.
Are being looked up to.
Yeah, Jayakrishnan, I think you have been quiet for some time. Your views on this to close it.
In fact, coming from the food background again, like in agriculture, we are using the blockchain to quite an extent. I would say it's been about 3 to 4 years. Before that, we had the geo mapping and geofencing of farms to build traceability. Then followed by that, we have got an international chain called Transparency One, who is auditing all our different handshakes done in the supply chain for getting it audited and getting it certified as a blockchain certified transparent model. In fact, today, if I give you an example of chili, for example, like chili, we can at just scanning a barcode, we can tell you like which farm it has come from, and this barcoding we are giving right to the product which goes to the US. So sitting in US, you can figure out which farm it has come from, which field it has come from. So right from the traceability part to all the handshakes that has happened in the entire supply chain is being tracked, it's been recorded, it's being audited, and it's provided as a QR code for the end consumer. So that's how blockchain, we are using it to quite an extent at the back end, I would say.
Hopefully this blockchain gets more widespread in Indian agriculture, because this is a very 2% fraction of the Indian farms which get tracked by the corporations who have business interests. India has a huge potential in farm sector, and I think the dilemma of the sector is India and Bharat, and I think that's very well defined. Don't want to get into that, but I thought what Jayakrishnan is saying is a great tool to move forward. And maybe Tarun, Gakhar can really look at ingredients which could be common to all this thing, and source it from India, reduce their risk policy, and rather than go anywhere else. So I think there is a lot of challenges that we face. one single sourcing, there is a need to map your supply chain. Your geographies needs to be seen, which supplier lies where, who is affected by a flood, who is not. If you know this, you can manage your single sourcing in a better way, or multiple sourcing in a better way. Mapping them using blockchains will make things much clearer. You would know where the pain is in tier 25 supply chain of automotive. Maybe yes, and that's where you need to really look at, rather than talk about doing a lot of corrections everywhere. Because if there's a black box that exists in the terms of ERP today, which are algorithms which are unknown to people and are driven by so-called APOs, then the things can be different. I think technology is forcing APOs also to adopt control tower and connected planning framework, where I think track and trace, granularity, efficiency, and agility, what in fact Tarun was talking about through vector flows and all. I think it is very important for us to have a single source technology which can map all your supply chain needs or all your organization need and marry with your strategy, technology or blockchain. I think there is a need for connectedness, and I think if that happens, you would even reduce your carbon emission by using a city logistics map where you move from the link road rather than inside the road. And I think you can do wonders in reaching places even with the infrastructure that India is creating. So I think I thank all of you for agreeing to be a part of this roundtable. We did not go the traditional way of panel 3 and 3. I wanted to experiment, and I think we all enjoyed the discussion. Question answer, I've already taken all the question and answer. So Jaisal, it's over to you now.
Thank you, Dr. Singh. I would like to thank all the panel members. Thank you for being there. Thank you, Sachin. Thank you, Vikas. Thank you, Ashish, Jayakrishnan, Tarun, Gaurav, Radha. Thank you, Aadya. Thank you, Girish. Thank you all. It was indeed a wonderful session, and I think a good takeaway for the audience. Thank you so much for being there. I would like to thank all the attendees as well, and keep watching us on social media and continue attending our webinars and sessions and forums. Last but not the least, thank you to Yvonne and entire ISCM team for making it happen. Thank you very much.